So, obviously, as you'd know if you're a fan of the show, you'd know that there's a miraculous Ladybug movie that has been made and is scheduled to be released starting in June/July this year. The film, directed by Jeremy Zag instead of Thomas Astruc, serves as an alternate take on the events of the show. A summary, if you will, of seasons 1 through 5, or, well, maybe not seasons 1 through 5, I don't know. At the very least, it's going to be showing the introduction of the heroes, their clashes with Hawkmoth, and really, I don't know if they're going to be able to cram all full 5 seasons into one film, simply considering how much you have to compress, but I'm sure that some compression is going to happen regardless. But yeah, that brief summary aside, I guess this sort of leads into the purpose of the video. Recently, I have noticed that I think the popularity of the show as a whole is on the decline. A couple of years ago, it was huge, massively popular, and whilst it is still popular today, it's not quite what it was. And this happens with everything really. Everything peaks and troughs in relevance and prestige, but that being said, whilst the show itself has waned quite a lot, I don't think the franchise as a whole necessarily has. The trailer releases for the film, they have massive amounts of engagement and discussion surrounding them. People seem really hyped for it, and honestly, looking at the trailer itself, it does look genuinely good. And so hopefully it does do well for itself, because it would be a shame if it was a critical failure, or a box office bomb. And then this got me thinking, why is this the status quo anyway? Why are people so hyped for the film and more muted in regards to the show? And yeah, it didn't take me long to come to the conclusion that it's all really to do with quality. Let's be real, the quality of the writing of the show is patchy. When you simply look at things from seasons 1 through 5, it is very stop and start. It takes forever for anything to happen, storylines are muddled, they disappear for ages and come back for an unsatisfying conclusion. And so more and more, this season especially, I see people dropping the show as they don't like where things have been heading. And so, I think for the movie to have a chance at maintaining the goodwill it's earned through its pretty decent trailers, I do think there are a lot of elements from the show that need to be altered somewhat, shifted, changed, and so strap yourselves in, because that's what we're going to be talking about today. Okay, for starters, we'll go with something that has little to do with the narrative at all. The visuals. They need to make the visuals good. And look, the trailer does look spectacular. It's really top tier. And leagues better than anything the show has ever done. And obviously that all comes down to budget, but I hope that this quality is maintained from the trailer to the film. The reality is that often there's a dip in visual effects and animation quality from a trailer to the finished product. After all, trailers are there to wow you and convince the audience to buy a ticket, and so lots of techniques go into trying to convince the audience to pay to see the finished product. So, you'd have to hope that none of that deceptive practice has gone into the film, because I tell you what, if it doesn't look as good as it does in the trailer, then it's going to be one of the biggest letdowns in Miraculous history. The show, its visual quality is not great. It is what it is. But once you've been teased with quality at this level, I mean, look at the water. Look at the water! Anything less is going to feel like a major downgrade. And I mean, there's been some big letdowns in the history of the show. But this could potentially take the cake as far as I'm concerned. But at the same time, it is just a small thing, as I do think the quality will hold. For the most part, the things that really urgently need to change are the elements of the writing and the way that characters come across on screen. Simply put, the writing needs to be overhauled in a number of major ways. And well, I guess the best place to start would be in the characters, and more specifically, the relationship between our two main characters, Marinette and Adrien, or Ladybug and Cat Noir. Now, quite famously, or infamously rather, the main ship of the show, one of the anchoring plot points, has been slow burning for like 5 seasons now. And to say that it's become tedious is like saying that it gets quite cold on top of Mount Everest. It's a bit of an understatement. So, first things first, no terrible slow burn romance, thanks. Holding off on any sort of romantic entanglement until a sequel feels like a pretty terrible idea if you ask me. I mean, imagine if Shrek and Fiona ended on a cliffhanger in the first film. Ugh, it's not what you want. It's a movie. Send us home happy. I'm not saying that you need to do the full identity reveal, or a full Hawkmoth reveal, or anything like that. I feel like you could stretch that out to a second film and it would work very well. But having a will they won't they dynamic stretch out across films that could have years between them, whew, my god, that sounds tedious. No thanks. At least in terms of their romantic relationship, the development I think should be rather rapid. After all, they are teenagers, are they not? A couple of days is all you need. After being forced to watch both characters pining for each other for 5 seasons stretched across years of real life, simply put, the way that that relationship is written needs to be changed. For all our sakes. On top of that, let's dial back the creepy and dial up the wholesome. Blushing, awkward stammering, cringy dialogue, that's all part and parcel of the teenage romance in animated film and TV. But the show takes it to new extremes and pushes it into some really weird territory. Like, that sort of stuff's been done in many shows, but it doesn't make it less weird. Tracking Adrien's schedule? Trying to sabotage other romantic interests at times? All the weird presents for all occasions? That's some stalker shit. Oh, let's not forget the computer background and the weird mural of photos. Nobody likes that. And then on the other side of the coin, you have Cat Noir, who for seasons and seasons was a mega creep. Always trying to woo Ladybug, flirted hard, tried to kiss her many times despite regularly being rejected, and that's creepy too. Consent workshop, mate. Go to one. And so, I really think for the film version, that whole dynamic needs an overhaul. You can still maintain the spirit of the love square without it being gross. So do it. Also, speaking of romance, the Luca and Kagami alternate ships, it muddies the water and it doesn't pan out anyway. I mean, seriously, those ships crashed and burned back to back after 1 or 2 episodes? Yikes. At most, those alternate ships should be used in a single scene to make the other character feel jealous or whatever. Storytelling 101. Don't waste my time. Next up, let's talk pacing. Romance aside, I think it's quite clear that if you're a long-term victim of the show, that the story moves at a snail's pace. Hardly anything changes from season to season, to the point that we're in season 5 only just now starting to come towards the finish line. The romance has just started. Gabe is on the way out. And Gabe is only just now starting to wrap up his story. This needs to be corrected. Things need to move faster. And the proverbial fat needs to be trimmed. There's a lot of side characters in the show. This needs to be whittled down somewhat for the film. Do I care about Max and Kim, etc.? Not really. Tops, you should have a bit of focus placed on characters like Alia and Nino and realistically Chloe as well. But delving into their position as side heroes? Nah. That's not something you need. It's not necessary. Maybe in a sequel, but the first film really does need to hone in on the important key plot points. It needs to streamline things, take the character introductions from season 1, Ladybug and Cat Noir's growth as a hero across all 5 of the seasons, along with some of the minor character growth, mostly Alia if we're being honest. She's very clearly the 3rd most important hero character. And then you smush that together with Gabe's arc across the 5 seasons, and by his arc I mean the reveal of him being a villain, the reasons why, his backstory, his relationship with Emily and Adrian and Natalie. I feel like that's the most important stuff that you need for the film. The stuff that has to make it in. And I do feel like maybe I'm rambling on a little bit here, but what I'm trying to get across is that just condensing the show into the film is not enough. There's both too much of some things and not enough of others. The best idea, in my view, is that you take these most crucial elements, the things that I've mentioned previously, and you make that the primary focus. If they try to do everything in the first film, and have us fully caught up with the show completely, it doesn't work. Some things do need to be left for a potential sequel. Because ultimately, there's too much story to tell in one film, and so many of these story threads are sort of disconnected from one another. And so you need to prioritize them. Because once you've set up Marinette and Adrian and Gabe in the first film, you can continue to grow their arcs, but also start to introduce the new elements as well in the future. So long story short, the film needs to change the order of events of the show and prioritize certain storylines over others, both to reduce the bloat, but also just to make things all the more satisfying. And so then, I think my final change that I'd make is to make Gabe as a character more likable. It's clear that the show intends for him to be a tragic villain, a dude who was a great dad, a great husband, and a family man who lost his way after his wife's death. A man who does love his family, but just keeps making the wrong choice after wrong choice due to his obsession. That's what I feel like the show wants you to think, what you're supposed to think about him. Instead, though, he comes across as majorly abusive and controlling, with no spark that even suggests why Adrian would like him at all in the first place. Instead, if you switch things up and he's mostly nice instead, with elements of being too overprotective and controlling of his son, instead of outright cruel and abusive, I think it frames the whole arc in a whole new light. And this reframing is one that I think that would suit the story being told in the film a whole lot better, and make his clash with Adrian as Cat Noir feel all the more tragic as a result. And then also, finally, I think it's clear that you can't just get rid of him after one film. You can't do the finale straight up. The ending of season 5, you keep that for a second film because Hawkmoth has got to stick around. The reality is that Gabe has always been the show's main villain. Don't waste him on one movie, because if the film does do well, you want to have options of where to go. Still having the second half of Gabe's arc as a loose hanging thread means you have time to set up a fresh villain, because ultimately you don't have time for a secondary villain in the first film. And of course, I'm talking about Lila, because that feels like the direction things are going in the show. This way, you can include her in a sequel without sacrificing half of the first film on explaining who she is and what she's doing and where she's going, and all the pointless exposition that you can put in a second movie instead. So yeah, pretty much I feel like the writing needs a massive overhaul if this film's going to avoid the pitfalls of the show. And so I do hope that Zag's been up to the challenge, because he apparently also wrote the screenplay. Seriously, if this works and becomes a success, popular and lucrative, I don't see how Asterix recovers. It'd basically just be Zag flexing on him and saying, look, I can do everything you can do, but better. And so yeah, there's not really much else to say. And so with all that being said, I'll just remind you that these have been my opinions, and now I'd like to hear yours. What do you think should be changed from the miraculous show to film? Do you agree with what I've said? Do you have anything else to add? I'm curious for your thoughts, so make sure to like, comment, subscribe, and let me know.